Yeah, great to see everybody. I just want to highlight that trip that Pastor Hannah talked about there, Experience the Wonder. We did that. We kicked it off last year, and it was one of the best trips that I have ever taken with our youth students, and I know many of them have said that this was their favorite trip in all their years of youth ministry. So if you have a teen that you want to send and they don't want to go, send them on this trip. I promise you it will be a very impactful moment in their life. And really the premise of the whole trip was to unplug, to connect with God's creation. And how many know that our teens, our kids nowadays, they're so attracted by all the technology that it sometimes pulls us away from giving God glory for all that he's made by focusing on what man has made. And so when we unplug from those devices, the technologies, it allows us to see what God has created in the way that he intended. So that's just my plug there, and I want to encourage you to check it out if you are a student here. A couple things before we begin. Last week was Mother's Day, and how many would say Missy Steinauer knocked it out of the park with her message? Yeah, I was really proud of her, and I know she's helping out with the Awaken Us event taking place in Shippensburg. It's going to be happening tonight as well, I believe at 6:30, so make sure you go out to that. It's beautiful weather. Last night it rained, but there was still a great turnout despite that. But again, Missy, wherever you are, if you listen to this, I'm really proud of you. You did a great job with last week's message. And at the very end, we just felt like it wasn't appropriate to go through with our giveaways. We wanted to allow time at the altar for prayer. So today, if you are a mom that came back for the second week in a row, just to get your prize, you are in luck because I'm going to do that right now. From here on out, it's up to you to continue to return, all right? No strings attached. All right, so I'm going to ask my wife, who is here helping me. It's great to have her in the front seat, and it's nice to have, yeah, thank you. My daughter, she struggles to stay in the nursery, and so today it's seeming like this is a day we're gonna win. So we have a few books. This is a book that Abby actually recommended. It's called Missional Motherhood, and she's been going through that. So we have 4 copies. Somebody stole one, all right? It's on you, moms. Dads, we're in the clear on this. All right, so Carol Burkholder, you're the number 1 winner there. Pastor Gary, do you mind running these to her? I guess I just have Abby. No, not the basket. We keep that last. Sorry, Carol. I'm sorry. I apologize about that one. All right, here we go. We'll put your name back in case you want to win the basket. Oh, wait, not all 4. I promise you by the 4th time, you're really going to love it, all right? That's good. All right, so we have another single book for somebody here. Shannon Peck. Okay, so Glenn's here. You can pass this off to Shannon. What's that? Oh, wait. I have Peck's messed up here. All right. Is Shannon Peck here? I'm sorry. Working. Okay, so we'll set aside Nancy Peck. I apologize for that. All right, here we go. Let's continue to do this. So we got one for Shannon, and then we got Missy Steinauer. I don't know. That doesn't seem right. 2 out of the 3 so far aren't even here today. So we got one for Missy, and then I should just cheat and look. No, I'm kidding. Liz Applegarth in the very back. All right, so here is the grand prize winner, and I guess I should pick this one because it just popped out. I did put your name in there, even though you didn't. But we got Louise Smith, all right? So congratulations. You get the basket of goodies. All right, and if you want to share with Carol, she already had her heart and her eyes set on that. Feel free to do so. All right, thank you, Abby. Thank you, Pastor Gary, for the help there. Father's Day is obviously coming up in June, and I heard something this past week where it encouraged sons or daughters, don't try to buy something expensive for your dad because he has way more money than you. And I think I like that. Maybe I'll just go golfing with my dad instead. But we just want to put it out there. Next week, we're going to have some giveaways we're going to share with you about what we're going to be passing out on Father's Day. So that's going to be a very special time. All right, today we are in week 4 in our series looking at the life of Moses. How many have enjoyed this series so far? All right, many more hands than who actually would consider Moses their favorite Bible character. So that's an encouraging thing for him as he's looking down upon us in the cloud of witnesses. All right, so today we're actually going to do a little bit of a jump. Last time we were in this series, Pastor Hannah spoke. She did an incredible job talking about doubts and just believing in what God has called you to do. But she focused on the fourth chapter of Exodus. Today, we're jumping 10 chapters. All right, we're going to Exodus chapter 14, and I hope you can forgive me for that jump, but I want you to know, if we're going to really go through the life of Moses, it's probably going to take us like half a year. There's 4 books that cover his entire life. So there's a lot of details that we are just going to miss out on. Today, we're missing a few things like the showdown between Pharaoh and Moses, the 10 plagues, and the first Passover. But here's the good news. Most of you, every year up until February, you already passed this in your yearly reading plan. So you know all about those events and those stories. After that, who knows where you are in your reading plan, but you should get to at least the middle part of Exodus in your reading plan. All right, so we're making this jump because last time, like I said, we were together. Pastor Hannah, she focused on Moses, the one God called who had many doubts, right? He had many struggles, really seeing himself in the way that God did. And the reason why we're jumping to Exodus 14 is because we are going to see Moses as the leader that God knew he was going to become. So there's a little bit of a contrast there. And I want to show you that God did an incredible work in his life as he led the people during the Exodus of Egypt. If you're taking notes, the message or the title of the message is A Trip to Canaan with a Stop in Death Valley. A Trip to Canaan with a Stop in Death Valley. And I'm going to pray before we dive in. Let's bow together. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you that we can come together and worship you. God, I thank you that we can have fun, we could enjoy our time together, and ultimately learn more about how you created us, Lord, and learn more about who you are and your redemptive story. I pray that you would just reveal to us more of who you are. God, show us your glory. Let us go deeper in our walk with you, and let it motivate us to live for you on mission as we leave this place. Do a work today. In your name, amen. Amen. So before we get into our our passage, I want to help set the stage in Exodus 14. So Pharaoh had enough of the Israelites, right? And he demands that they leave Egypt. And after 430 years, the Israelites are finally free to leave their home. And so with the promised land in their future and slavery in their past, they had every right to be optimistic about what their future was going to look like. But as we all know, with the Israelites, that hope, that expectation would quickly vanish during their first trial on their journey. So Exodus 14, our text today, you have to understand that it was a deliberate test designed by God. Its purpose was to provide God's people with this idea that life was going to look different for them here moving forward. It was a test that Moses had already passed up to this point as well. And I want you to think about this. Every Israelite that was on this journey, they had spent their entire life living in Egypt. They were fully immersed in its culture, right? That means their habits, their customs, their practices were deeply rooted in their temporary home. And so God knew that he had to reform his people way before they got to Canaan or the promised lands. And so near the end of Exodus 13, again, we're setting up the stage here of where we're going. Near the end of Exodus 13, verses 17 and 18 says this about their journey that God had them on. He said, God did not lead them along the main road that runs through Philistine territory, even though that was the shortest route to the promised land. God said, if the people are faced with a battle, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led them in a roundabout way through the wilderness towards the Red Sea. And we're going to show you a map here in a few minutes to get you to the place where you see the long route that God took them rather than the short route, all right? And I'm not really sure if the Israelites had an awareness that they were going the long route to Canaan, but we just know that they knew they were following the Lord here. We want to continue setting up this moment by looking at Exodus 13, verses 21 through 22. This is how God led his people. He said, Moses says, the Lord went ahead of them. He guided them during the day with a pillar of cloud, and he provided light at night with a pillar of fire. This allowed them to travel by day or by night, and the Lord did not remove the pillar of cloud or pillar of fire from its place in front of the people. How many know that life would be a whole lot easier if you had God directing every step for you with a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire, right? It would be way easier to know the will of God. Like, should I take that job? Well, if the pillar of cloud is resting above the contract, that means that you should probably take the job, right? If you're contemplating a move with your family and you look outside and you see at night the pillar of fire just continuing to move down the street, you know it's probably time to pack up everything and move to where the pillar's taking you. Or maybe you're contemplating, hey, should we have another child? And you're talking about this with your spouse in the living room. All of a sudden, the pillar of cloud starts going upstairs and it hovers above that guest room, right? That means this is God's will. He wants us to have another child. Or this is where I wish the Lord would give me a pillar of cloud to direct my steps. Should I have that second donut, right? If the pillar of cloud is resting above the glass of milk, that means he wants you to have the donut. And the last one, should I have Taco Bell? If the pillar of fire is resting above the bathroom doorway, I think that's him saying, no, you do not want the Taco Bell, right? So anyways, they had it pretty easy, right? The trip to Canaan for the Israelites, it seemed to be simple. It seemed to be trouble-free up to this point, but that abruptly changes because God orchestrates a moment where the Israelites were going to be placed in an extremely vulnerable position. And so I want to pick up this story here in Exodus chapter 14. We're going to look at this whole chapter today. A lot of verses, but we're going somewhere with this. Verse 1 in Exodus chapter 14, it says that then the Lord gave these instructions to Moses. Order the Israelites to turn back and camp by Pi Hahiroth. I practiced this so many times this week, and I still butchered it. Between Migdal and the sea. Camp there along the shore across from Baal Zephon. Then Pharaoh will think the Israelites are confused. They are trapped in the wilderness. And once again, I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will chase after you. I have planned this in order to display my glory through Pharaoh and his whole army. After this, the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. So the Israelites camped there as they were told. And so I want to give you an idea of where we are on the map by showing you a little bit of some aerial shots of this region. So if you don't mind, Bobby, showing the first image here. They didn't have the luxury of what you see behind me, which was an aerial image of the land that they were going to. There's a lot going on here. Top left is Goshen. This is where they lived for 430 years. You see that white line? That's actually their trip to Canaan. This is where God was leading them. And the whole time, they could have taken the orange route at the very top, a very short route, but unfortunately, they didn't have GPS. Their only GPS led them the long way around to Canaan. And so this kind of gives you an idea of the Exodus, and we're going to be focusing in on the very bottom of the map in the middle. And so you could go to the second map here to give us a better idea of where God asked them to go. So this is the second map. This is where our passage is taking place. They were camped in Etham, which is near the top of the map, day 16. And God tells them to turn back and camp across from Baal Zephon, which is that island. It's actually a mountain region right there in the water. So they're told to camp there on the shores. And notice with me, okay, this helps us to understand what is about to take place. Notice with me where they're located. To the north, there's really no place of escape if there was an enemy that came upon them, right? That's all mountain region. To the east is the sea. To the west are more mountains. And then to the south is where they just came from. And so they were hidden away inside of this little pocket right there that didn't appear to be bad at the time, but you'll notice that it's going to really create an issue here in a few moments. How many would agree that, and you could get rid of the map now, one of the most frustrating things about traveling is realizing that you made a wrong turn or you've been going the wrong way for some time and you have to backtrack, right? How many know that? Especially those that live before the GPS, MapQuest. Like, I remember us traveling with MapQuest. I have no clue how we survived. I mean, it just was so confusing. Then the Atlas, you got your mom in the passenger seat with the highlighter and everything. It's just a nightmare. So backtracking is very frustrating. Now the Israelites, they didn't have this map. They just relied on God guiding them up to this point. And for them, realizing, hey, didn't we just come from this way? We were in Etham. Now God's asking us to go backwards. I imagine a few of them probably tapped Moses on the shoulder up front, said, hey, we're going in the wrong direction. Do you think God knows where he's taken us? And Moses probably didn't have the answers. He just knew that he had to follow the pillar of cloud and pillar of fire. And so God, he knew exactly where he was taking his people in this story. This was all part of the test. And here's the thing about tests. Sometimes they get harder before they get better, right? In college, I was not great at taking tests. I loved writing papers. For whatever reason, I could put in 8 hours of study, and I'd still come out with something in the 80s, right? My best friend, who turned out to be the valedictorian of our class, his name's Sam. Every time, it's still a joke today, every time we'd go in for an exam, I'd say, now Sam, you don't think this is going to be too difficult, right? Because I had this anxiety just build up all the time. Every time he would just assure me, it's not going to be that hard. It's not going to be that hard. Easy for him to say as the valedictorian, right? So I just want you to know this test that the Israelites were experiencing, it was only going to get worse for them. So I want to pick up here in verses 5 through 14. We're building a lot because we're going somewhere, right? We're going somewhere. Verse 5 says this: when word reached the king of Egypt that the Israelites had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds. What have we done letting all those Israelite slaves get away? They asked. And so Pharaoh harnessed with chariot and called up his troops. He took with him 600 of Egypt's best chariots along with the rest of the chariots of Egypt, each with its commander. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. So he chased after the people of Israel who had left with fists raised in defiance. The Egyptians chased after them with all the forces in Pharaoh's army, all his horses and chariots, his charioteers and his troops. The Egyptians caught up with the people of Israel as they were camped beside the shore near Pi Hahiroth. Guys, I apologize. I've tried. Across from Baal Zephon. As Pharaoh approached, the people of Israel looked up and panicked when they saw the Egyptians overtaking them. They cried out to the Lord, and they panicked when they saw the Egyptians overtaking them. They cried out to the Lord, and they said to Moses, "Why did you bring us out here to die in the wilderness? Weren't there even enough grace for us in Egypt? What have you done to us? Why did you make us leave Egypt? Didn't we tell you this would happen while we were still in Egypt? We said, 'Leave us alone. Let us be slaves to the Egyptians. It's better to be a slave in Egypt than a corpse in the wilderness.' But Moses told the people, 'Don't be afraid. Just stand still and watch the Lord rescue you today. The Egyptians you see today will never be seen again. The Lord himself will fight for you. Just stay calm.'" And so here we see in this passage, Pharaoh realizes that he made a big mistake letting the Israelites go. And because of that, he gathered 600 chariots, Obviously, it has 600 soldiers on there, but I'm thinking there's probably about 2,000 soldiers in all that accompanied Pharaoh in this moment, because every chariot had its driver, and also it had a soldier on top of it as well. And so there's probably 1,200 right there, and then there's extra soldiers that went with them to go get the Israelites. Now, imagine with me that you are one of the Israelites. You're camped on the shore. You're obeying God's lead up to this point, and all of a sudden you hear what sounds to be thunder off in the distance, right? You look up, you don't see dark clouds in the sky, no chance of rain, and so you kind of push it off, thinking to yourself, maybe I'm just hearing things. Then a few seconds go by, and that sound, it only begins to intensify second after second after second. Fear starts to creep in, and you look around, and you start asking other people, are you hearing what I'm hearing? And all of a sudden, they're saying, yeah, we hear the same thing. You're looking around, nobody's seeing anything. Then all of a sudden, somebody looks south, and they say, look over there. Look at the dust. It's growing larger and larger. Somebody asks, hey, is there a sandstorm that should be coming at this time, right? And then somebody else notices that there's chariots and horses, 600 of them to be exact. I don't know about you, but in that moment, I think a little bit of panic and fear would set in, right? Especially realizing where you are on the map. You have no place of escape. The only option was really to go south, but that is where the enemy is coming from. And so terrified, the Israelites, we see in verse 10, they look to God, but then they immediately turn to someone else to blame because of their predicament. And typically, this is how we handle our problems, isn't it? We have a struggle, we have a challenge, a test. We look to God briefly. The moment he doesn't respond in the way we want him to, what happens? We start blaming other people. And so here, who do they pick to blame? They pick Moses. Leadership 101. When things go wrong, you typically are the one who's going to be blamed for everything. Welcome to leadership, Moses. Now listen again to what this group said. Why did you bring us out here in the wilderness to die? Weren't there enough grace for us in Egypt? What have you done to us? Didn't we tell you that we are okay living in Egypt? Essentially, this group, what they were saying was, we would rather be safe as slaves than to be in danger as free people. Now, Moses, in this moment, feeling the pressure, feeling the weight of what was taking place, he had a few ways that he could have responded as a leader. He could have complained. Like, hey, look, I'm just doing what I was told. This is God. This is all on him. I'm just doing what I was told. It's ridiculous to point the finger at me, even though we're about to die, right? He could have defended himself like, hey, you guys are the ones who have followed me, right? I didn't make you come on this journey with me. It's all your fault. And then he could have been frightened rather than leading, right? Rather than leading, he could have been frightened, and instead of doing anything, he could have been paralyzed by fear. But here's the thing, the Moses, and here's the contrast again. The contrast is the Moses that we see here in Exodus 14 is not the Moses that we see in Exodus chapter 4. He was now a mature leader who has already overcome many tests and obstacles up to this point. And so Moses tells the Israelites to do these things in Exodus chapter 14, verses 13 and 14. He says, number 1, don't be afraid. Number 2, be still. Number 3, watch God come through. And number 4, stay calm. Other translation says, it says keep silent, right? Now Moses says this because he understood the natural response when troubles come our way, which is we are afraid. We tend to run, we fight, and then we complain to everybody, right? How many know that fourth one's pretty true, right? Now, understand this, that God didn't bring them this far to see them die or to return to Egypt. He had a plan in it all. The Israelites just needed to look up and trust in him. They needed to not be afraid. They needed to stand still. They needed to watch him come through, and they just needed to be calm. Easier said than done, but they do it. Now listen to the next part, the last part, verses 15 through 31. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell these people to get moving." I love that part of this story. It's like Moses says, "Hey, just watch God come through." God tells them, why are you waiting? Just move, just go, right? The answer was there the whole time. They just need to look up to him. Tell the people to get moving. Pick up your staff and raise your hand over the sea. Divide the water so the Israelites can walk through in the middle of the sea on dry ground. And I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, and they will charge in after the Israelites. My great glory will be displayed through Pharaoh and his troops, his chariots, and his charioteers. When my glory is displayed through them, all Egypt will see my glory and know that I am the Lord. Then the angel of God, who had been leading the people of Israel, moved to the rear of the camp. The pillar of cloud also moved from the front and stood behind them. The cloud settled between the Egyptian and the Israelite camps. As darkness fell, the cloud turned to fire, lighting up the night. But the Egyptians and the Israelites did not approach each other all night. Then Moses raised his hand over the sea, and the Lord opened up a path through the water with a strong east wind. The wind blew all night, turning the seabed into dry land. So the people of Israel walked through the middle of the sea on dry ground with walls of water on each side. Then the Egyptians, all of Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and charioteers, chased them into the middle of the sea. But just before the dawn, the Lord looked down on the Egyptian army from the pillar of fire and cloud, and he threw their forces into total confusion. He twisted their chariot wheels, making the chariots difficult to drive. Let's get out of here, away from the Israelites, the Egyptians shouted. The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt. When all the Israelites had reached the other side, the Lord said to Moses, "Raise your hand over the sea again. Then the waters will rush back and cover the Egyptians and their chariots and charioteers." So as the sun began to rise, Moses raised his hand over the sea, and the water rushed back into its usual place. The Egyptians tried to escape, but the Lord swept them into the sea. Then the waters returned and covered all the chariots and charioteers, the entire army of Pharaoh. Of all the Egyptians who had chased the Israelites into the sea, not a single one survived, despite what the movie says, right? The Prince of Egypt. But the people of Israel had walked through the middle of the sea on dry ground, as the water stood up like a wall on both sides. That is how the Lord rescued Israel from the hand of the Egyptians that day. And the Israelites saw the bodies of the Egyptians washed up on the seashore. When the people of Israel saw the mighty power that the Lord had unleashed against the Egyptians, they were filled with awe before him. And they put their faith in the Lord and in his servant Moses. So Israel obeys Moses and what he tells them to do, right? Look up, trust God, watch him come through, be still, be calm. Moses tells them to do this, and God comes through. And as a result, he does four things specifically. The first thing is this. In verse 15, God tells the people just to get moving. You're walking towards the sea. May not make sense, but I want you to march, right? Number two, we see then that God takes the cloud, the pillar of cloud that was before them, and he moves it to behind them, right? He creates a barrier between the Israelites and the Egyptians, which does a couple things. The first thing is that it blocks the Egyptians from having a good view of what's taking place with the Israelites. The second is that it prevents the Israelites from looking back at their problem, right? Third thing we see in this passage is that God splits the sea in verse 21. It says that the east wind blew all night, causing the seabed to dry up so the Israelites can walk through with no issues. God does everything to make sure there's no problems whatsoever for his people. The Egyptians also thought that God was kind of setting things up quite well for them too, and so they go in after the Israelites, but then we see the fourth thing take place. It's God's final move. God destroys the most powerful army that existed in the world in verses 24 through 26. He causes confusion, causes the chariots to really go all over the place, swerve, making it very difficult to drive. And then he caps it all off. God caps it all off by telling Moses, just stretch your hand over the waters and it will go back to its normal place. And not one Egyptian lived beyond this day. See, the Israelites may have thought that they were the ones who were going to die in that valley, but because of God, not one Israelite was dead. God devastated the Egyptians. And here's what's crazy. He devastated them so much that this place, the Egyptians wouldn't visit for many years. They would stay away because they just feared going back to this land. Listen to this. Historians and unbelieving archaeologists have helped us draw additional insights about this milestone event. Records indicate that the Egyptians did not frequent this place for 17 long years after this miracle took place. They held it in awe. Not until the 23rd year did they seriously try to reestablish their authority in this area. The message arrived back home that God had visited the Red Sea, and it remains an unfriendly place for the Egyptians for a long, long time. That's pretty incredible, right? And one thing you have to understand is that you're not going to find really any mention of this moment in Egyptian history because the Egyptians typically focused on their victories and they didn't want to focus on their defeats, right? That would be embarrassing. To lose to this group, to lose because of the hand of God, that's embarrassing to them. And so you won't find any mention of this. But I love how Moses finishes this chapter. When the people of Israel saw the mighty power that the Lord had unleashed against the Egyptians, they were filled with awe before him. They put their faith in the Lord and in his servant Moses. Now God received what he had desired way back, verse 4 of chapter 14. God tells Moses this, I have planned this moment. I have planned this in order to display my glory through Pharaoh and his whole army. I have done this to display my glory. God's purpose was to reveal his glory and to receive the glory. Moses shares this desire, and instead of yielding into the pressures, the complaints of the people, he chose to lead by guiding people into a place where their only option was to focus in on the Lord. And as a result, the story ends with them giving praise and glory to the Lord. As a result of his leading, they came out on the other side as well with no issues whatsoever. On this day, the test was passed because their leader gave them the solution to their problems. Look to God. Don't look at the army. Don't look at the challenge. Don't look at the storm. Look at your Creator. And so I want to wrap this all up. We've got one point today. Pretty simple. One point, and then it leads to the big idea. The only point is this. How you respond to the test will determine how he responds with the results. How you respond to the test will determine how he responds with the results. Now, the truth of the matter is that every single one of us in this room, everybody watching online, we have all gone through tests, right? How many would agree with that? You've gone through challenges, storms. And I want you to know that you're going to continue going through them as well. One of my favorite passages, because I feel like it's helped me out so much in life, is just the opening verses of James chapter 1, where James talks about the trials that we experience as believers. It's actually a good thing. Trials help mature us, right? They strengthen us. They help us through in our journey of life. Tests are there to create perseverance. And here's the other thing, is that when we go through tests, when we go through trials, they actually help us to become more like Jesus, and they draw us closer to God. So we will go through tests. And when you come up against that test, you can respond in one of two ways like the Israelites. You can go the natural route, which is you can live in fear, you can try to run, you can try to fight, and you can try to complain to everybody that will listen to you or like your posts on social media. Or you can do what Moses said, which is you cannot be afraid because you know who's on your side. You could stand still, you could watch him come through, and then you could just stay calm knowing that God is going to take care of all the results. You have to understand that when you exclude God from the equation, you deprive yourself of victory and you rob him of the glory that he deserves. By placing God at the center, you guarantee triumph for yourself. And you guarantee that he will receive the glory. See, when you rely on God's help, I promise you that you will consistently overcome any challenge. He's not going to lead you to a place where he doesn't know how you're getting there, right? How you're getting through. It may not look like you thought it would, but you know what? I'm sure the Israelites never imagined that they were going to walk through a sea to get to the other side, to get to freedom, right? May not look like you think it's going to look, but God's got a plan through it all. On the other hand, relying on anyone else offers no guarantee of victory for you. I believe really one of the determining factors, and this is leading up to our big idea, I really believe that one of the determining factors on how you react to a test is evaluating who you are allowing to speak into your life. Again, initially the Israelites, they looked to God, but quickly they aimed their fear and anger to Moses. And what does Moses do? He responds by pointing them back to looking to God, right? He didn't try to come up with a plan using his wisdom, his creative abilities. He didn't tell them to retreat or run. He didn't blame anybody. He made God bigger than the situation. And so who you allow to influence your life will many times determine how you respond to tests. Are you being influenced by people who are pointing you to God? I remember when I was 20 years old, I went through really one of the most challenging seasons of my life. So as a pastor's kid, we moved around quite a bit. And thankfully, my parents have found a great church to pastor. Tonight, I'm going there being honored for 20 years of service. But, during my really formative years, we moved around quite a bit. But there was one steady, consistent place that my parents always took us, and that was to camp up in Maine by the Canadian border. And so from a young age, there was a person that I became very close friends with. And, we lived very far from each other, but we always stayed in contact. And then we went to college, and they went to the same college as me, and it was just awesome to be so close to them. Long story short, here we go. At 20 years old, this person, we were having a lot of frustrations and challenges as friends. And I'll never forget that in the summer of 2019, I was up in Maine, and I received a message from this individual that was very hurtful, very long, and I didn't know how to respond. So I went to a spiritual leader that I thought I could trust, and it's a pretty well-known evangelist. I'm not going to share with you who it is, but you would probably pick up who it was if I said the name. But I went to them. I said, how should I respond to this situation? And this is what they told me to do. Respond LOL in all caps. So as an impressionable, younger adult, what do you think I did? I responded LOL in all caps. One of the dumbest things I've ever done, right? And so for the next, you're laughing while I'm crying inside, right? So for the next year, literally a full year, this person didn't say one word to me. Their family really turned their back on me, everything. They didn't say one word to me. We spent many classes together. We saw each other all the time. We went to college together. A lot of chaos came out of that influence there in that moment. And I made a huge mistake by allowing someone to influence me, and they didn't point me to God. Rather, they pointed to me, they pointed a recommendation to me based off of how they respond to haters on social media. Really, really unwise decision there. And as a result, the outcome was terrible. So I say all this to say that in looking at the life of Moses here in this story, the big idea highlights the leader that Moses had become and a leader that's worth following. And that's this. Here's the big idea. A true leader seeks to make sure the one and only true God is glorified. A true leader seeks to make sure that the one and only true God is glorified. How do they do that? They point you to God when you go through a test, when you go through a challenge, when you go through a storm, rather than relying on their own wisdom or another option that may lead to your destruction. Moses didn't try to do anything other than point people to their Creator. He wasn't leading for his glory, he was leading for the glory of the Lord. And I want to encourage everyone here today to really evaluate the spiritual leaders that you allow to speak into your life. With social media and everything, we have an abundance out there. Can I say that a lot of what I see in like those 45-second clips, they don't really seem too beneficial for us long term, because it seems like a lot of it's focused on the preacher, the speaker, rather than on the Creator. And I was thinking, I've been really struggling. Like, I had to go into the doctor on Wednesday twice for some things, and it's just been a really crazy week. And one of my challenges was figuring out how to conclude this message. I tried to finish on Thursday, edit on Saturday, but I couldn't even finish until yesterday. And I've been really struggling with, like, how do I put a button on this? And then Friday came, and I realized this is how I'm going to conclude the message. So the big idea: a true leader seeks to make sure that a true leader makes the one and only true God. Can I rewind really quick? A true leader seeks to make sure the one and only true God is glorified. So Friday, it was a day that I'll remember, and I'm going to make no apologies for this, but my favorite author passed away, right? Tim Keller. I'm sure you've heard of him before. At one time, when I was a young adult, I could not stand Tim Keller because there was many things that he believed in that I just don't agree with. And still to this day, there are differences in some theological beliefs that I just do not stand with. And you know what? As a young adult, I didn't know how to handle that dynamic, right? But over the years, I really allowed other people to share with me, why do you like this guy so much? And somebody gave me the book, The Prodigal God, which is the story of the prodigal son. And I really saw myself in that story, really the brother. We talked about this a couple months ago in one of the messages, the brother that stayed home. He didn't run away. And from that point forward, I really started kind of soaking in a lot of his teaching. And this morning I went to go see, how many books do I have of Tim Keller? I've got 19 total. And so as a young adult, I went to some of these churches that had the celebrity pastors. When I was on vacation, I would try to go to a city where the celebrity pastors were, right? They had the lights, they had the bodyguards that stood by them before and after service. You couldn't even get close. And as a young person, that stuff attracts you, right? You don't want really the people with gray hair to be the ones influencing your life. But that was me as a young adult, okay? Really dumb, unwise, foolish. And so the Tim Keller aspect of this, why did I jump in and follow a lot of his teachings? Because I found that in everything that he said, every message he preached, every book, he always brought you to Jesus. Always brought you to Jesus. And I'm thankful that I'll continue to have his works. And I definitely have taken time to mourn over his life, but he's not Jesus, right? He's not the Lord either. But he did a great job pointing people to Jesus. And so as I've grown, and God's still continuing to weed a lot out in my heart that is really foolish and stupid and really connects with just being a young adult, as I continue to grow older, I've started to appreciate more and more, not necessarily the size of the stage and the person that sits on top of it, but the leaders that point you to Jesus and not themselves, right? And so this is how we're buttoning up the message. I know many of you are probably going through storms, you're going through challenges, and we're going to have a time of prayer here in a few moments, but I just want to challenge you to evaluate the people that you follow. Are they pointing you to Jesus, or are they pointing you to themselves? If they were to fall, or if anything bad were to happen, would your faith be rocked to where you run away from the church? Or would you cling even tighter to Jesus, because that's the one that they pointed you to the whole time? A true leader seeks to make sure the one and only true God is glorified. That's what Moses did. That's what we're trying to do. Our community group leaders, our children's leaders, youth leaders, we're trying to point people to Jesus so that God is glorified. So that's where we're ending today, and I know it's an abrupt end. It's a weird end, it's an odd end, and I'm still just going to try to figure out how to conclude this message someday if I ever re-preach it. But align yourself with leaders who will point you to Jesus. When you're going through challenges, don't be afraid. Stand still, watch him come through, and just stay calm. And when God helps you pass the test, whenever that comes, give him the glory. Let's bow our heads this morning. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you for your truths. We thank you for who you are. And I just pray, Lord, that we would take time today to evaluate where we are in our relationship with you. Have we put spiritual leaders, other people, in the seat that you deserve? If that's the case, Lord, I ask that you would speak to us today and remind us that there is nobody on this earth that can help us to overcome what life throws our way other than you. You have all the power. You have all the strength. You know every step that we are to take, and all we have to do is look to you. And God, I thank you that today we have this reminder that we have all experienced a challenge, and that is that we are lost without you. We're so lost because of our sin. And without our sin being paid for, we would spend an eternity in hell. We'd be far from you. There would be no way of escape. But God, you have given us an escape today because of Jesus. You have sent your son to this earth to die on the cross for our sins. And because of that, you have given us a way out when it seemed to be impossible. And because of that, we give you glory and praise because we have no ability to save ourselves. And that's why the sacrifice of Jesus is just so great. So if you're here today and you have never taken time to surrender your life to the Lord, I want to encourage you to do so. If you say, I've never given my life to Jesus, I've gone through challenges, I've gone through storms, I've gone through hardship, can I tell you today that you will continue to go through those, but you don't have to go through them alone. And if you would say you would like to surrender your life to Jesus, would you just take a moment and raise your hands, and we're going to say a prayer together. Anybody in this room at all? Say, today I want to surrender my life over to Jesus, who gave his life for mine. Dear Heavenly Father, we ask today that you would remind us that you are a good God. God, when we go through challenges and storms, help us to remember that these are tests. And with you on our side, you will help us to overcome. We just got to look to you. We got to stay calm. We got to watch you come through. Help us to rely on you instead of relying on others to give us what they can't give. Help us to see you in the way that you want us to see you. God, help us to give you glory today. In your name, amen. I'm going to ask everybody to stand with me today. We are going to take time to have some prayer. It's time where we get to respond in a couple different ways. I'm going to do this just because I want to focus on our time of worship. I know the ushers are going to collect an offering. Wayne and the team, if you guys don't mind, why don't we just stand in the back today, and you guys can collect offering in the back as people exit. There's also bins located around the room. But we're going to go into a song, and I don't know where you are, if you are going through a test, a trial, but I'm going to invite the prayer team to come forward. And what we want to do is pray with you, encourage you, and obviously points you to God, who can help you through whatever obstacle you're experiencing right now. So as the worship team begins to lead, let's take this time to just reflect on the message and also come forward with any prayer needs.